welcome back to another thrilling tale, a fish tale, a film tale, Pinballs with the Master of Ceremonies. Tonight, my co-host is the Master of Ceremonies, MC Mori McMori. Say hello to the fine people.
You heard him, fine people. I'm a fishy tail type of fella, and well, I like to keep myself honest. I'm a real straight shooter, if you know what I mean. And so this is the second installment of Pin and Balls, and on our last installment, we discussed Juan Piquer Simone's legendary film Pieces. And I just wanted to go ahead and fact check myself because I know, like going back over the episode, I definitely made a mistake. So I made it sound like all of the people that die in Pieces or most of them, are lovers of the main character, Kendall. But that's not actually true. The first one is a potential love interest. That's what gets Kendall involved. And there might be another one from there, but no, not nearly all of them. Some of them have nothing to do with Kendall at all, from what I remember. So I just, it was a minor thing, but I just wanted to clarify there. And if you wanted to learn more about Pieces, I would recommend two really great sources. The first one being the legendary film critic, the legendary drive-in film critic, Joe Bob Briggs, and the second being the legendary horror director who's also a walking encyclopedia on horror, and that would be director Eli Roth. They both said some really interesting things about Juan Piquer Simone's Pieces. And by the way, he goes by Juan Piquer Simone. If I'm not mistaken, he sometimes goes by Louis Coates in America. It's a very American-sounding name, Louis Coates.
I love it, Louis Coates.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's simple, it's honest, it's true. Coats are made in this country, you know.
It sounds like a hard knocking beat detective. I love it.
Yeah, so I just we can move on now. I just wanted to clarify. I'd like to spend the start of the next episode clarifying anything I got wrong in the last episode, which will probably be a lot. So, because I love these films, but I don't always necessarily sit down and watch them right before I talk about them, which makes it a little more fun, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. And besides, it still means we're more valid and accurate than CNN.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Or Fox, or there's only one source of news I trust, and that's the voice I hear when I shove my head into the puddle outside of my own home.
Fuck yes, follow your own truth. So what's on the docket for today, MC?
So today we're going to be talking about another movie that I love, that I watched. I didn't watch Pieces a million times growing up, but I did watch this movie a million times growing up. I call it Swamp Thing 2. But its actual, I guess you could say, Christian name is The Return of Swamp Thing. The first Swamp Thing wasn't a bad film, but the second one, again, I call it Swamp Thing 2. It's actually called The Return of Swamp Thing. It's a phenomenal film. Very, very good. A lot of these movies we're going to be talking about are going to be horror movies, and this one technically is, but this one's a little different in terms of the trashy movies that we're going to be discussing in the coming weeks. This one is just a really fun, campy thing that knows what it is. And we're going to have to know a little bit about the first Swamp Thing. And it's been even longer since I've seen that one, because I really do think Swamp Thing 2, or again, its Christian name is The Return of Swamp Thing. But I really do think Swamp Thing 2 is the better film, honestly, even though the first one's worth seeing. And it's also The Return of Swamp Thing is directed by Jim Wynorski, and he directs some fun things. So,
oh, I love it. So see, the thing is, what I know about Swamp Thing, and I know very, very little about it. I didn't even realize that it was a Marvel or a DC thing. I didn't even realize it.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because I've never been into Marvel or DC or anything like that. And growing up, I thought Swamp Thing, like the first movie, and then especially the second, I just thought it was incredible. It doesn't feel like a Marvel or DC thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. I just always thought of it as campy horror.
It's definitely pre-Marvel and DC, and you can tell that it's pre just through its existence of not having those influences yet. But it also, I would say it makes it better, but that's a subjective term. But it definitely makes it different. It almost seems like it could be a freer thing before Marvel and DC really started to hone in on what people expect from the modern, I guess, quote unquote superhero movie. I guess if you want to call them that.
Well, see, yes and no, I suppose, because from what I know about Swamp Thing, it does have a very a heavy environmentalist message. So it does have their propaganda formula well underway.
Maybe, I mean, maybe the comic. It's important to note I've never read the comic, okay, and I mean, I've seen the first film several times, but I really like. I love Swamp Thing 2, or again, Jim Wynorski's The Return of Swamp Thing. I love this film. There's some sequels that are just as good, if not better, than the first one. Another example is Child's Play. Child's Play 2, just as damn good as the first Child's Play. And because when you ask people like Chucky, Child's Play, vintage Chucky, back when it started, what do you think of? Almost everything that everybody describes and thinks of, including me, actually came from Child's Play 2 rather than the first.
Huh.
And so, like a lot of people like me think of the big final showdown that happens in the good guy factory. That's the second one. And I mean, I think the first one there's some at the factory too, but the second one contains all these classic moments that made the series, and that's how I feel about Swamp Thing 2. The first film's worth seeing, so you can go into Swamp Thing 2 and just have an amazing time. And you don't even have to see the first one to see the second one, honestly. I think I saw the second one first. It just one of those rare sequels, man. Just it's as good, if not better, than the first one.
Well, then let's begin with our protagonist. He's already gone through his first adventure. He's become a thing of the swamps. I guess he
Now
fights
wait,
for nature. He fights corporations.
wait. I have a question. I have a lot more to say about this. No worries, but I do have a question. What pinball are you playing?
Oh, we're still in fishtails. We got to get this guy to get his family back.
Oh, nice. Okay, so what are you? How What's your? Are you doing all right on the table? Are you progressing? Are you helping the man earn his children back?
I think we're making some good progress, but I'm not entirely sure. We might have a swamp thing come and attack us for overfishing.
Gotcha.
Does he care
Gotcha.
about the marshland wet life, or is it just the swamps? Is it like Aquaman but for
Um,
swamps?
to be honest, it's more like, I mean, if you just go from the movie and nothing else plays into Swamp Thing like the comics or anything like that. Really, I mean, a lot of what he does for love, or I guess you could say he does for his penis. But he also, I mean, he helps kids, and he doesn't do that for his penis. So.
Well, that's good. That's good. At least he's a hero we can get behind.
Exactly. He helps kids just to help them, not to ship them off to an island. Exactly. That's
D-
exactly.
So does it like if it like so is that what happens? A bunch of kids just get stuck in his swamp and he helps them like solve a mystery?
Oh God, no. This is an incredible, like, just a smorgasbord of monsters and experimentation, and it's got Heather Locklear. Um, it's pretty great. So okay, Swamp Thing. His original name is Dr. Alec Holland. Okay, and in the first film, because of this guy, we'll get into it. Because of the bad guy in the first film, he's well, not really because okay, he became Swamp Thing. I'm trying to remember the origin story. They go over it in Swamp Thing 2. Um, but he's like in his lab and he's like experimenting with something and ends up catching on fire. I think he accidentally blows something up. And so he's on fire and he's running around like panicked and he jumps into the swamp to put himself out because he's like badly on fire. Okay. This is like one of the worst cases of being on fire that you could be. All right. So he jumps into the swamp. It puts him out, but for whatever reason, like I think a combination of whatever he'd made that he'd spilled on himself, plus being on fire, plus jumping in the swamp, that's how he became Swamp Thing. This like living, breathing mass of swamp attitude and manliness. Um,
Wait,
but
wait.
anyway,
So he catches on fire and falls into the swamp. Like that's Spider-Man doesn't turn into, Bactine or Neosporin after he puts it on the spider bite. He turns into a spider. Wouldn't the swamp thing be the fire thing?
You'd think, or maybe like Fire Swamper, or Swamp Flame, right? Or
Yeah, marsh
yeah,
gas.
no, I think the fire was more just a catalyst, like whatever the hell it was he spilled on himself, plus the burning of the fire, plus the swampiness of the swamp. It's
S-
like an X plus Y equals Z thing.
So would he have turned into the swamp thing? I'm sorry, MC. We're gonna have to spend some time on this before we get into the film. So, if he had just fallen into the swamp, but he wasn't on fire, would he have become the swamp thing?
Uh,
See, this is why I don't do the
that's
cape genre.
That's a good question. See, what I'm going to do is after each segment, I'm going to rewatch the film before the next one, before we do another one, and then I'm going to clarify at the start. You know what I mean? So I'll have more to say when I get back.
Oh, don't
But
worry. It's all
yeah,
about the
I'll have more.
mystery. So he catches fire, he jumps into the swamp, and he turns into the swamp thing, and he just
Now
declares like vengeance against fires.
it's important to note that there's a type of he's like a scientist research doctor guy, and there's this other doctor, Dr. Arcane, Anton Arcane. Okay. He's the bad guy. He actually turned into a werewolf at the end of the first Swamp Thing to fight Swamp
wait, wait. Oh my god. I've never looked so it's got swamp monsters and it's got werewolves. I feel
Thing.
like I
Well,
have been
the first one does. It's important to note the second one is directed by Jim Wynorski, and he is a lot of fun. The first one was directed by Wes Craven before Wes Craven had kind of found his stride with Friday the 13th and all that shit. So it's a two very different. Like Wes Craven is a known horror director. I'm not saying he's a bad horror director. He's not. But if I remember correctly, I think it was Reservoir Dogs. He walked out of Reservoir Dogs because of the violence. Like Wes Craven's a little different than people think of when they think of him. Although he
really.
also, some of the things he made would got me in trouble when I was a kid. So I don't know if he has any right to, walk out of a film. Got me in trouble with my parents, at least. But anyway, so, okay. So Swamp Thing 2, actually, The Return of Swamp Thing by Jim Wynorski. It's got to do with the serum that Dr. Arcane. Okay, so he becomes a werewolf at the end of the first one, and that's not by choice. It's this serum that turns you into whatever you really are, or whatever. And that's the serum that Swamp Thing spills on himself, or whatever, and ends up Dr. Holland spills on himself and ends up jumping into the swamp. So he's not just swampy, he's also big and brute and muscular, okay? But he's also a nice, good person. Whereas Dr. Arcane, who's a piece of shit person and is just kind of bad, he
Mm.
he cares about personal gain, not really helping other people. Um, he turns into a werewolf when he thinks he'll drink this potion and become this ultimate powerful version of himself, and he kind of does, but he becomes a senseless werewolf, right? And
Yeah,
so
it's interesting. It's a very interesting juxtaposition of what you would call, I guess, that pagan Gaia nature worship, where you've got,
right,
a gentle Mother Earth, the marshlands, an entity of nature, versus a werewolf, which is the not necessarily apex, but some kind of cold, ruthless killer, the predatory, destructive force of nature. Interesting.
okay, yes, totally. So
Just like
all of that
Spider-Man and the Green Goblin.
all of that we just described was the first Swamp Thing, Wes Craven. Okay,
Okay.
now we're on Jim Wynorski's The Return of Swamp Thing, and somehow by the time we get to The Return of Swamp Thing a few years later, Dr. Arcane has been able to become human again. But it is kind of played off as he's the leader of this research lab that's cutting edge. So it's kind of like he had a team of scientists figuring out how to fix this. So okay, he figured it out, right?
Ah, I see. Yeah, he's like an Edison. He's got the staff and the team, whereas
Yeah, I mean
our
it's kind of like movie magic. It's kind of just written off, but at the same time, it's not just completely out of left field. It does. If there's any character, if there's any big evil character that has the resources to reverse some horrible thing like turning into a werewolf permanently, it's him. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like,
I'm just imagining how they would write that off today in this joyless economy when they're making things like She-Hulk, attorney at law, when they would just joylessly have him say like, "Wait a second, Dr. Arcane, but I thought you were a werewolf." And the Dr. Arcane just smirks and looks out the window and says, "Well, I fell on a silver knife."
right, right. Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah. Well, no, that's exactly I think that's exactly what it says like when you look up a description of this film. Like one of the blurbs is that he becomes human again because of these two like assistant doctors that work for him that like basically took it upon themselves to reverse it, which I guess was smart because in of doing that, they kind of became like the main underlings, you know.
I mean, hey, if you wanna impress a werewolf, just cure his werewolfism.
Yeah, I mean,
Lycanthropy?
I'd
Yeah.
be if I was a werewolf, I would be hella fucking impressed with that, right? But again, so he was a werewolf in the first one, and by the second one, he's not. In fact, he's quite dapper and well spoken. Um, I think if anything, being a werewolf really did do him a little bit of good. Like I think he came back and was like, okay, I've seen what it's like to be a beast, and I shall be even more refined now. Because he wasn't necessarily brutish before he became a werewolf, but he's definitely like to feel a little fancier in Swamp Thing too. So anyway, of course, he, in an effort to, I think it's immortality that he's after. It's not even that he's sick or dying. He's just getting old. He's just older, and it's just coming upon that time where he's not going to be here in another decade or two for sure, right? And so he decides, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna take the stab at immortality. I mean, hey, they brought me back from being a werewolf, right? So in the pursuit of that, he does all these like experiments and shit, and he makes all these mutants. And these mutants, okay, this is not X-Men cool superhuman mutant. This is ungodly, like Silent Hill-esque combination mutant of human and animal or insect, okay?
Oh god,
Um,
the hybrids, the chimeras.
They're great, dude. The Roach Man, he's only shown briefly, but he's very unsettling. Um, the and not some of them are just like a human and half an insect or an animal, cut like the Fly style. You know what I mean? But some of them are more complex than that, or a little more, I guess, monstrous. Some fat, very very good film in my opinion. Love Swamp Thing too, but one of the best things about Swamp Thing. Okay, so the first Swamp Thing, there were these two boys in the swamp, and they were a part of like an ongoing bit that involved Swamp Thing. Okay. And they were actually one of the better parts, I feel, of Wes Craven's film. And even though it's a different director, and even though I feel it's better than Wes Craven, I feel Wynorski did a way better job. He does the proper sequel thing and still sticks like I mean he still hits the right references to the right actors and the right characters from the first film. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
He does it his way, but I mean he doesn't drop the ball on anything. And they bring those two little boys back, and they're a little bit older now, but they're still kids, and they're pretty funny. I really like them. It's hard not to like them in your, especially now, like in your later adulthood life, like around like your 30s, right? It's really fun to look at these two like kids that their parents leave, like one of the like they're hanging out because they're friends, and one of their parents leave for the night, and so they bring out like I think it's like beer and porno mags, and they put on like vintage MTV in the background, and it's just like I don't know, it's hard not to be charmed by it. This era that you wouldn't see that happen now. Like the equivalent scene would look different. Like those scenes still exist, but it would look different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's
That's a
true.
very tough place. Like, like set up and thing. But for them, like to see them doing that, like to be enjoying that so much because that's such a familiar sight to you from when you were younger. And then there's a knock on the door, and they start like putting away the porno mags and putting away the beer and turning off MTV even, and like they're gonna get in trouble for literally everything they're doing right now, right? They're like 12, right? Like they're like putting everything away all scared because they're sure it's one of their parents, because who else is going to knock on the door? And so like they make sure
Timmy, we
everything looks
have to
good.
hide. We have to hide.
Exactly.
Mom told me we can't play with transhumanism anymore.
There you go. So they put everything away. They look at each other to make sure everything's cool. They open the door smiling, and it's the fucking leech man. And he is one of the best movie monsters. Now I was like 8 or 9 when I first saw this film, but it blew me away. The leech man is one of my favorite movie monsters of all time. A God, he's amazing, dude. He's as big as a man. He's tall as hell, and his face is just this long leech trunk that ends in a snarl close to the ground of just teeth and shit. God, it's great,
That
man.
is some straight up Slender Man horror right there.
There's some great creatures in that film, and also some good brick jokes. Great stuff. Yeah. Um, Swamp Thing 2, Christian name, the Return of Swamp Thing by Jim Wynorski. Yeah, there's more to say about it. I just have to kind of take a second and just be like, yep, damn good film. You know.
So we've got our hero. He's, I guess, saved these kids or saved the swamp in the first one, and he had this werewolf doctor nemesis. Now this werewolf doctor is cured, but I'm guessing this leech man works for the werewolf doctor. He just cured himself, but he's trying to make other chimeras to do his bidding to dot dot dot
Oh, yeah,
something.
thank you. I'm so glad you started talking about Dr. Anton Arcane, which is an incredible name.
I love that the scientist has the name of a wizard.
Swamp Thing's original name is Dr. Alec Holland, which is such a regular, everyday American Joe, Alec Holland, right? Like you'd hear that at the bar. Hi, I'm Alec Holland. So you wouldn't think twice about that, right? Typical name, right? Typical fucking name. And then his basically evil counterpart is Dr. Anton Arcane. You know what I
Master
mean?
of the unknown.
And his two assistants, I just looked it up because I couldn't remember their names. His two assistants that helped cure him, Dr. Rochelle and Dr. Zurel.
This is the kind of guy who wants to get vengeance on Yale for rejecting his PhD in quantum metaphysics.
Yes, but that's why he's searching for Swamp Thing. He wants to take Swamp Thing's DNA because there's something about Swamp Thing's mutation that's different than the ones he's caused. Maybe partly because it was an accident and not on purpose. Who knows? But he wants to capture Swamp Thing and get his DNA because he's fairly confident. I think he's right. I think he ends up being right too. But he's fairly confident that Swamp Thing's DNA is the key to gaining immortality.
You can definitely tell with that being one of the stakes that this film was made a long time ago, because today it would just be like, all right, henchmen, we're going to create our own company called 24 and Me, and we're going to
Yeah.
tell everyone that we'll tell them exactly what their genetics are, and then we'll send a mail-in coupon directly to Swamp Thing, and he'll never know.
Right. Yeah. No, there's so many more crafty, honestly, creative ways of getting his DNA. Even like here's what's really funny about it. Okay, you want his DNA? Well, Dr. Anton Arcane, his the character's daughter is of course like Swamp Thing's like love interest, right?
Oh, of course, she has to be.
Because the evil doctor, Dr. Arcane, he of course gives birth to like a hippie, plant loving, pacifist, peaceful vegetarian daughter,
Oh, of
right?
course, of course. That'll show,
But
Daddy.
he of course has to use her, okay, as like a vessel while using Swamp Thing's DNA, right?
He's gonna make a
He's
she
gonna
Swamp Thing.
he's essentially going to have to use her up and kill her in order to
Oh,
get Swamp Thing's like quote unquote immortality into himself.
okay, yeah, that is sufficiently evil. All right.
And he's gonna do it. And he's kind of sad about it. He loves her. She's cute. I mean, it's his daughter, you know. But he's gonna fucking do it because he wants to be immortal. Yeah,
Yeah, damn.
exactly.
All right.
Swamp Things fucking love actress. Yeah.
imagine being that daughter and it's like, Daddy, I want to go to college. Why don't you pay for me to go to college? There's no need to worry about that, sweetie. Okay, fine. I was gonna go like travel a bit. You don't need to worry about that, sweetie. Like what's the investment in that child at that point, you know?
Right. Well, see, here's the thing. I don't know if Dr. Anton Arcane, I love his name. I don't know if Dr. Arcane ever knew this, but his daughter, uh, well, um, let's just say, I'm pretty sure it's heavily implied that she she fucks Swamp.
Hmm. I mean,
I
now that I'm
think.
thinking about it, if this Dr. Anton Arcane really just wants to be immortal, why doesn't he just set himself on fire and throw him in the swamp like the Swamp Thing did?
See, that's a good point. I don't, whatever, if I'm not mistaken, whatever it is that Arcane's using, it's not, I think Holland had some concoction he was making, probably for either a good reason or at the very least a neutral reason. Because he's never really portrayed, at least not in the films, as really doing anything wrong ever, honestly. But also, the films are very action heavy. There's not a shitload of character development. I mean, you put it in where you can, you know. You mostly just have him kicking ass, you know. I mean, that's the whole point. But okay, so ask your question again
Hmm.
because I knew
I,
there was a way to
I,
answer.
I don't know. I feel like every time I ask these kinds of questions, I just feel like I'm ruining an entire franchise for people. Like,
You're not. You're not. Like hardly anybody cares about the. Well, I almost called it by its Christian name, but I call it, you know, Swamp Thing too.
okay,
Hardly anybody cares about it.
I
It's
just,
got a great opening with the Leech Man, like taking out like all these like I don't think they're actual soldiers. I think they're like weekend reserve or whatever people. Or maybe they're just pretending. They might be hired mercenaries. Anyway, um, there's a lot to Swamp Thing now that I'm actually thinking back on it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure she bonks him. I also think she consumes a piece of him. And if I like a flower bud of his or something, I
huh.
want to say she becomes a Swamp Thing at the end of it after they bonk like proper.
Oh, like in Shrek.
I because I think I okay, I can't remember the actual ending. Unlike Lewis Coates, aka one Piquet Simone's legendary pieces. I actually can't remember the actual. I can remember the ending, but I can't remember all the details. Okay, so I'll know this for next week because I'm definitely talking about it. God, that makes me want to watch it again. But anyway, so if I remember correctly, things the Dr. Arcane is almost successful. Okay. But then, like, I think Swamp Thing fucks things up like last minute somehow. So Dr. Arcane isn't successful. I think he dies, but they might have pulled you know, maybe he survived thing. I don't think there was ever a third film, but they might have set it up to where there could have been.
No, once you've set
Um,
the precedent that the guy who was a werewolf in the first one is cured in the second one, we just kind of assume he's never gonna die.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, right? I mean, you can bring them back at any point. If you come back from being a werewolf permanently, then yeah,
I'll get
yeah,
you
that's
next time, Marshman. And your
that,
Greenpeace activist, too.
yeah, exactly. But imagine that you become a werewolf, you become human again. They're like, "Welcome back, doctor," and you're like, "Wow, I was this smart doctor before. I was a mindless werewolf for a while. I've now become the smart doctor again. I need to be immortal. Like at a certain point, it's like, dude, you're getting pretty fucking greedy. Like, I mean, for at least like a few years, I'd be like, holy shit, I can't believe I made it back to being human. Wow, this is nice. I mean, like, you don't even like look around for a minute and go, wow, it's nice to use a toilet again and not just shit on the floor, you know? Like, yeah. Anyway, so it's like, you want a lot, dude. I guess he knows what he wants, but I can't remember the exact ending. It involves lots of really cool monsters. It involves storming the base and the lab. It involves, I believe, at least one, if not both, of the sub doctors becoming monsters themselves, including the asthmatic one, and that's awesome.
Wait. What does
Um,
the asthmatic doctor turn into?
it's I'm trying to remember. I don't think I can say clear. See, he didn't get merged. Okay, it's important to note. Oh, this is what I was saying before. It's important to note that you said, why not just do what Swamp Thing did to become immortal, right? Which I'm sure
Yeah.
he would. He literally turned into. He didn't know he'd become a werewolf, but he literally turned into a werewolf just to try to find and catch up with Swamp Thing and kick his ass enough to bring him back, right? In the first one. Um, anyway, um, if I'm not mistaken, Swamp Thing, like Dr. Holland was, um, he was doing something, and he just had like this like random concoction of shit that he spilled on himself and then lit on fire and then jumped in the swamp, and it was all of that together that fused him with like the swamp material, and that also caused him to essentially be immortal. Like that's his whole thing is like you shoot him or whatever, and I mean he'll take damage, but he'll grow parts of himself back,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. I think there's also a part, if I remember correctly, in the second one where he like chops himself basically into like little pieces and squeezes himself infused with water into like a bathtub or some shit like that. But but he's essentially immortal. He's like this living swamp creature that can just like heal itself and regrow itself basically.
Okay, see,
So
now I'm
that's been
starting to see that this what seemed like a pretty shitty power in the beginning is starting to seem like, oh, okay, this is pretty handy.
yeah. I will say I think the film does a really good job of never overplaying it, because it took me several times of watching it growing up before I realized quite how powerful Swamp Thing is. But that also made me look at it different. Looking at it when I was younger, you know that he can regenerate. You see him do these things. It also at times seems to be painful, and it doesn't necessarily seem to be immediate either. Like there is kind of this sense of like you still can't let anybody get the jump on him too much. Like I'm sure if he was incapacitated, they could find some way to eliminate him permanently. Does that make sense?
Oh, of course, yeah, we
I
can't
mean,
we can't have a Superman.
like you can't just point at him and shoot him and die. But there's still stakes. I mean, yeah, I mean you could capture Superman, exactly.
Yeah,
Try to
how
find some way to,
how do you
yeah.
kill a swamp?
Yeah, exactly. It's hard. But anyway,
Do you find
so if I remember correctly,
contractors to
the
just
ending,
pave over him?
right? The ending, okay, Dr. Arcane, he's not successful, but she's like dead. He got very close. So even so he's like dead or dying or whatever. Swamp Thing rescues her from the lab that's burning down and carries her to the swamp and basically like kisses her and puts her in the swamp. And for several reasons, she becomes a swamp thing. I think not least of which they were intimate,
Wait,
like
he wait,
physically intimate earlier in the film.
okay, so the ways that we've established in canon that one can become a swamp thing is that you can get you can ingest or be covered in an experimental chemical, get set on fire, and then fall into the swamp. That's one way. The other way is that you can eat part of a swamp thing or get fucked by a swamp thing. It also seems like just kind of wandering into this swamp could make it happen. Is like has no one else just fallen into this swamp before? Is it just this one swamp?
Well, it's also she was sucked dead dry through some weird scientific process thing. And
Uh,
also there is true love between them. Like I mean, I'm not down on love, I'm not down on true love. I'm not currently in a relationship, but I've been lucky many times over. I've been in lots of really cool, fun, interesting ones, and yeah, also some that taught me quite a lot, And I'm not down on love by any means, but Swamp Thing and Abigail, which is Dr. Arcane's daughter, Abigail Arcane, which is a phenomenal name for like a suicide girl or like a cam girl or whatever, like a goth one, like yeah, Abigail Arcane. I don't know.
I
Anyway,
just love that. Hi, I'm Abby Arcane. Y'all, we should do something about climate change. Daddy, stop it right now. I'm gonna let all of the monkeys out because you shouldn't be experimenting on them. Oh my god, Abby, do you understand what the contract with Maybelline is gonna cost us now?
but see, that's the thing.
Hocus,
Uh,
I see your message, Hocus, and we're already working on it. El fin
oh,
del swampo. Contra de la
I didn't
familia.
I didn't see what Hogan said. But that's the thing is, I think another reason she became a Swamp Thing is true love, and I think in Swamp Thing's instance, the true love came from himself, knowing that he's a decent person that's like trying to help the world. And I think in her case, the true love came from both of them. So I think you got to be tragically killed against your will, either through accident or murder. Either way seemed to work. And you have to basically be dipped into the swamp and just kind of, be in the swamp and totally full of the swamp vibe. And I think you have to have a tremendous amount of love for yourself, and or it probably helps if you have love for another person.
See, I'm just wondering, by the third one, does Dr. Arcane just have his daughter in one hand and the swamp in the other, and they're both suspended over a volcano? He's like, you all can only choose one swamp thing.
See, that would be the great. See, because like it really does set the. I wish they would have done a third one with Wynorski, because they really did set it up decently for as fun as now. I mean, you look up Swamp Thing 2, again, Christian name, Return of Swamp Thing, but you look up Swamp Thing 2, a Jim Wynorski film, and you see that it doesn't have the absolute lowest reviews of a film that you'll ever see, but it does not have the highest. This is very much like a 5 out of 10 film. Like, I
I mean,
mean, it's, a lot of people are kind of like, because it really does have a lot of awesome, incredible sequences. And it has some really fun characters and some great dialogue. And the plot is crazy, but it never stops. Now, I watched this movie almost endlessly as a kid. I was obsessed with it. And I really didn't give a fuck about Swamp Thing only because of this film, Swamp Thing 2. Like it like there's people that like love Iron Man, so they like everything or most of the things like or a lot of the things that Iron Man's in, blah blah blah. This is like the opposite. Swamp Thing 2 is a piece of art. You get what I'm saying? Like Swamp Thing's cool. And the return of Swamp Thing, or as I call it, Swamp Thing 2, it makes me like Swamp Thing more. But my love is for Swamp Thing 2 as a film. You get me? Like, um, but it's
yes, sir.
also, I mean, it's Jim Wynorski. We're definitely going to be talking about more Jim Wynorski films as time goes on.
I'm sorry, I'm just completely blown away. I had thought I had had a completely different idea of what Swamp Thing was going to be. I had thought it was going to be something like almost Captain Planet or something, where he declares war on some sort of coal plant or something. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Instead, we're finding out it's a
So,
classic heroic myth. An evil wizard who wants to use science to create leech people.
I mean, like human animal hybrids. It's a tale as old as time, really. Um, but one of the really cool. Okay, the throwdown between Swamp Thing and Leech Man. See, that's the thing. Like, if Swamp Thing's around and if there's two boys that are about to be devoured by a Leech Man, now, there's a good chance Swamp Thing didn't know about that random chance encounter. We really couldn't have blamed him. I mean, that'd be like blaming me because, like, somewhere in the vicinity that somebody hurt somebody else. Well, how the hell would I know if I'm not there? You know what I mean? Like I can't help if I'm not aware of it. And I'm not just out looking all the time. And even if I am, I'm not always going to be in the right place at the right time.
Well, yeah,
There's
of
a million
course.
things going on.
It's swamp.
Nonetheless,
It's swamp sense, not back alley sense. It's not kid
there you
getting
go.
stabbed in the mall sense. It's the swamp. So if you
And,
kids come to this swamp, I'll be able to
and
sense you here. But if you leave the
as for
swamps, you're on your own.
Jasper, this fucking leech man. I mean, you need to. We both need to watch the film after we talk about them before we talk about the next one. Um, but yeah, I mean, when you see the way that leech man takes out that group of people at the start, I mean, that leech man would have destroyed those children. And these children are very likable. They're good actors, seem like good kids. You know, as adults, I'd grab a beer with them. As kids, I'd fist bump them and be like, "You do you, man," and they'd probably be cool and be like, "Hell yeah, dude, you're awesome." I'd be like, "Oh yeah, like the youth approves." Um, yeah, they're rock and roll kids. They're cool, and they'd have been eaten to fucking death. I mean, that fucking leech man would have devoured them, just destroyed those fucking kids, dude. Just destroyed them. But of course, like much like the end of the world will come, Swamp Thing appears without much of a sound, just kind of watching, you know, and he intervenes, of course, the last moment, and just it's an you think of like you think of like a Marvel movie. I didn't even realize we'd be making those comparisons, but of course we are, because in this day and age, it's hard to talk about anything considered, even half considered, to be like a superhero thing without making like a Marvel and or DC comparison, right? But it just like I don't know. This was a time where like the sequel, Craven Swamp Thing, could be this weird campy. That's another thing. It's campy as hell. Like Swamp Thing 2 is damn near as campy as the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Like they're both like clear examples of camp, if that makes sense. And the first film was way more dramatic. Like Wes Craven's Swamp Thing was way more dramatic. I don't want to say Craven Swamp Thing was a flop because I can't. I've never actually looked that up, but it is kind of boring, kind of slow. I don't really see it doing. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah,
And it
no.
kind of makes sense why the sequel to that film, especially if it didn't do well, which I don't think it did, it kind of makes sense why that sequel would be directed by Jim Wynorski. Because let's look at just a few other Jim Wynorski films. Um, we have The Bear Winch Project from the year 2000. Yes, that's what I said. The Bear Winch Project.
Oh yeah, no. The
Um,
porn version of the Blair Witch Project. Yes, I love it.
mhm. Piranhaconda from 2012.
Piranaconda.
Um,
We have to do one about that.
Sorority House Massacre 2 from 1990. Swamp Thing
Mm.
2, actually, the return of Swamp Thing is from 89. And one we're definitely going to talk about is 1986's Chopping Mall. Definitely one of the really interesting ones by Wynorski. But Wynorski's just made so many interesting low budget things. Sometimes horror movies, sometimes something a little more, you know. Um, it's one of those really interesting directors, but it makes sense that I mean you look at Wynorski's like resume and it's like short of Swamp Thing 2, The Return of Swamp Thing, it's and then that one's a B movie basically. I mean, it's basically just B movies and exploitation, you know.
I don't know. I'm liking this
Mm.
idea Hocus has about the porns. We're gonna need a Swamp Thing porn. We're gonna need a She-Hulk attorney at law porn too.
Right, right.
She-Hulk object. God, it's kind of strange because I saw someone posting a picture of She-Hulk attorney at law on Twitter, and I did a bit expecting what the difference between the critic ratings and the audience ratings would be based on their request for the bit. Uh,
Right.
I thought it was a meme. I didn't think it was a real movie. I didn't think it was a real thing. And so hearing about what the cape genre used to be versus seeing what it is today, it's it's not even the messaging, because clearly there's still some kind of environmentalist anti-scientism, or at least pro-ethical science. We have the ethical
Yeah.
scientist in the Swamp Thing, and the evil scientist who will gain whatever he wants for himself, no matter what
Ethical,
cost it is for
ethical,
others.
okay. Ethical scientists, that just reminded me. So they don't actually have physical sex. I assume they do at the end after she becomes a swamp thing and is resurrected, and they literally like walk off into the sunset hand in hand. I assume then they'll probably start making. You know what I mean?
Do they literally walk off hand in hand into the sunset?
It is. Yes, with their, freaky deformed swamp bodies silhouetted against, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, it's almost like a different early take on Shrek. But anyway,
This is
so,
basically Shrek. This is Shrek with evil scientists.
like this is like more of like an action grown up, not really for kids Shrek. Yeah, exactly.
Is there a donkey man?
But that's the thing, dude. They don't physically. I don't think so. There should have been, but I don't. They don't physically have sex actually in the movie, though. I mean, it is implied they will. I'm sure later, after they are of one and the same. But that's how they hook up earlier in the film. She's like human, and he's like a swamp thing. And so I don't know how he knows how to do this either, but he apparently just knows. This kind of implies that maybe Dr. Arcane's daughter is not the first lady that Swamp Thing is hooked up with. But he grows this flower on himself and tells her to eat it, and she does. And then in her mind, she's like lost in her mind, almost like tripping, and they have like mental sex, right?
I was
And
about
then
to
when they
say
come out of
this.
it, and then when they come out of it, they're both like satisfied, but she's confused because it wasn't like physical. So she asks him like, "Was it real?" And he says something along the lines of like, "As real as you want it to be." I mean, I think he said it like more like "as real
You
as she
should do
wants it
that next time you just imagine some shit getting roofied or something and waking up. What happened? Was that real? It's as real as you want it to be, baby.
Okay, well, you kind of halfway suggested that I just like roofie people for fun there, which I
Oh,
don't.
no! I meant him giving her his roofie flower. Like literally, like that's because my thought is the Swamp Thing is just this amalgam of like algae and I guess clams and reeds and those little hot corn dog plants or whatever, and he just grows a flower out of his shoulder. I mean, thank God the flower doesn't show up
You
where his dick
know,
is.
you know the way a swamp tree, it's got those roots that are like there's a shitload of roots, right? And they're running into the muddy, swampy ground, and they run up to like some bark, and then they go up higher to like some green leaves. That's basically what he looks like.
Oh
And he's
God.
more like swamp and moss and less wood, and he's more wood and less swamp and moss, depending on exactly if you're talking about like comic Swamp Thing or the movies Swamp Thing. Or he almost looks like a mummy in Wes Craven's one, the first one. But the second one, I really like the way he looks. He's just a lot of like green muck, like twigs and shit. I think it works.
I'm honestly just relieved that your description of this swamp tree was of him and not of his flower.
Yeah, yeah. It's if I remember correctly, I think it's like a white flower with purple edges. It's a pretty tame looking. Maybe it might be a different color. I'm gonna have to rewatch it, and we'll say what color the flower is on next week's installment. I haven't decided what we're gonna talk about next week, but
I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna have
try
to.
that next time and just lean over, hey baby, and I sprout like a little marigold or something, and Kenny G starts playing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That sounds about right. But yeah. Swamp Thing 2, birth name, legal name, The Return of Swamp Thing. Um, I mean, it's a classic. It's from an era where you could make a comic book film or a superhero film that was a shout out to the first film and kind of also in many ways a shout out to the comic book at the same time, and its own solid thing with character and a weird plot and characters that you care about. Like there's conversations with lower henchmen in that film, and again I saw it when I was really young, but I have watched it off and on as I've grown up and gotten older, and I really do feel it stands up. I mean, there's characters that are henchmen in that film that are more fully fleshed and interesting and likable to me than outright villains in several of more modern films. Like even the big bad. Like I mean, even the underlings I feel are better than the average big bad today.
Because that's back, back then we were still allowed to exist in a world where there were stories told about good versus evil. Today we'd have to start talking about how, well, his daughter is just privileged and she should think about, her father, and maybe we should start considering it from his perspective. We're viewing it through our mortality bias.
Well, see, that's kind of the thing. It's campy enough that
What
there's
if Dr.
it's campy
Anton
enough
was
it's campy enough that there's good and evil, but it's also campy enough that you can like some of the evil character. Like they don't have to. Every time you have an evil character, they don't have to be like stabbing someone and spitting on a dog. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
it's not like that
they could be like
hmm?
that makes them better. You know.
Yeah, it's not like say Pieces where the whole premise is I murder people because they won't let me do what my penis wants to do, so I'm a victim of society. If
I
it weren't for
guess
these morals, I would be a good person, but now I have to murder.
I think the dean is the killer in Pieces mainly because they got to the end of the film and said, "Hey, it could have been him. We haven't established it couldn't be him.
Shit, we need an ending. Who do we pick?
Who do we pick? Like, well, who have we not either like killed or disqualified essentially? But it's like, but anyway, Swamp Thing 2, The Return of Swamp Thing. That sounds like that should be the whole title of as campy as it is. Um, but it's actually The Return of Swamp Thing. But it's Swamp Thing 2. And it's the reason that I love Swamp Thing. I don't really care about the franchise. I don't really care about the character. Swamp Thing 2 as a film is just so much fun, man. It's you just don't see films like this anymore. When you do, I don't know, they just feel different. And it's not even that it crosses all these crazy lines. It's not that it jokes about things or talks about topics that maybe people would be less interested or more hesitant to discuss today. It's nothing like that. There's nothing like really pushing the envelope there. It's just so uniquely its own weird thing.
Yeah,
And
it's just a wholesome
I
story
just
about
yeah,
love and
yeah.
swamps and eating a man's flower penis.
I just love that there's a time that it could exist, man, where they would make this into an actual film because for everything it is, a continuation of the first film, a bit of a shout out. I mean, there's parts of it that are like shown in like comic panels. I mean, it's got the shout outs to the source material. Like the film came out, and I think more people were aware of the film, regardless of how well it did, at least for a while, than of the source material. So the sequel does a good job of like being like, oh, by the way, this came from a comic. I feel but at the same time, it continues the first story. It brings all these characters back as well as new ones that all work together perfectly. Everybody feels right. It's just good, and then at the same time it's a shout out to the source material, and it's its own thing that just never stops having fun. And it's just, even at the time, it's just always, that's one of the hardest movies to make, is a movie that does so much and doesn't fall flat. You know what I mean?
I don't know.
And it just works.
Maybe we
It
should
just
give
works.
She-Hulk Attorney at Law a chance.
I don't know. I'm not sure, if I feel the same way about the Hulk as I do about this one particular version of Swamp Thing. in this very in most of it, because Swamp Thing is typically displayed as pretty much just good. He's not like tortured good like Bruce Wayne. He's not like good and like charismatic and likable like Peter Parker, although he is, pretty much displayed as being, at least when he was human, as being handsome and nice and likable and all that. It's just that he's just like the straight arrow good person. Like if there's someone that's going to help, it's him. And so for him to be the lead in this campy ass film with all these ridiculous characters, think about it that way. That's another reason it works so well. Damn near every character other than him is either this horrible freakish monster or some form of comic relief, basically, other than his love interest and the main bad guy. Like everybody else is comic relief, including the underlings, or some type of horrible monster, or at times both. It's always either horror or comedy, and I think that's another reason I love it so much. Is I personally, those are my two genres, horror and comedy, and it's such a phenomenal, absurd melding of the two. And I already leading up to this, I was thinking about some of the things I was going to say. I don't think I realized until this moment just how much I love Swamp Thing 2. I love that damn film, man. I really do. Like, if you just need something to put on because maybe it's brand new and you need something fun and exciting to get invested in, or maybe you've seen it before and it's been a while, you just need something comfortable. It doesn't matter, man. It doesn't matter what's wrong, what you're dealing with. It's like the one of the most perfect background movies you could ever put on. Regardless, you don't even have to. And I think it's a good film. I think you can easily and enjoyably watch it start to finish. You don't even have to watch it start to finish. It's just the perfect movie to have going in the background while you like do laundry, or it's just one of those. Do laundry, wash dishes, and Swamp Thing's just like beating the shit out of Leech Man in that fucking trailer park. You know what I mean? Like it's just badass. Like in the pouring rain, like night. It's incredible. Yeah.
Huh.
Great film. Okay, I think we've gone over the entire plot. I can definitely talk some more about it though. One thing I really like about it, and I need to look into who did the makeup effects. But one thing I really like about it is the creatures. Some phenomenal makeup effects, and there's probably some computer generated stuff in there when it comes to the lab equipment, like the bright flashing lights and people's like essentially their souls or whatever leaving their bodies, shit like that. But like all the creatures and shit, it's all like makeup, and it looks good, man. Like
Well, yeah,
it looks
that was back in that time when horror makeup and effects were actually like a field. It was an art, a craft that people, aspired to. It was something real made by people. It wasn't a series of pixels or some sort of green screen that you just kind of
right
computer blah blah into it. It was actual work.
for sure, for sure.
Back when they actually gave a shit.
Yep.
They'd start giving a shit again too if we just stopped going to see things that are bad.
Yeah. Well, people do what's easy. That's why we have so much reality television.
She-Hulk Attorney in Law at theaters now.
I mean, I'd even go for that honestly over, Ultimate Avengers 7, the Final Confrontation Part 3 or whatever.
This is true. She-Hulk Attorney at Law has the potential to be a work of comic masterpiece. The idea
Yeah, it
of a
also has
Hulk
more
trying
life.
to navigate the realm of courts. But we both know it's
See,
just going to be a green version of Ally McBeal.
this is where slowly but surely it's going to start getting better. Because eventually the superhero shit will be so played out that people will be like, all right, typical superhero action movie, whatever. Eventually they're gonna have to be like, shit, we gotta throw in some crazy element. What if Peter Parker was also, a member of Led Zeppelin or like the Sex Pistols or like they're
what
gonna
if
have to go to crazy to go.
what if the Avengers were the band of brothers?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, what if, yeah. What if the Fantastic Four helped find Private Ryan, right? Yeah, exactly. Like,
what
it's just
if
something
what if the
so
cast of
absurd.
Friends was replaced by the X-Men? God, fucking WandaVision. These idiots will buy anything.
Actually, one I'd watch. What if the X-Men killed the cast of Friends, like, savage?
Wolverine, or wait, is he an X-Man?
While the cast of Seinfeld laughed.
He's an X-Man. He cuts X's into people.
We're gonna have to consistently work Seinfeld references into everything we do.
I could see that as a Seinfeld episode. Elaine's like, he's a real life superhero?
Right. Yeah. She always had the lines where she's like asking a question while making a statement. Yeah.
So he's a superhero. He fights crime. He's a good guy. He mostly
Yeah.
hangs out at the swamps.
And then Jerry states the obvious, like, obnoxiously. Yeah, and then someone like cuts him down. And then George screams something from the bathroom.
Elaine runs into Seinfeld's apartment after eating the Swamp Thing's flower and just slams the door and says, "I ate his flower. You ate his flower. I ate his flower. You ate his flower. I ate his flower. You can't eat his flower. I know I couldn't eat his flower, but I did eat his flower." Kramer walks in. "Whose flower did you eat?"
Right.
Costanza's just like, "Not mine. Been a long time since anyone ate my flower."
The one, right. The one episode I feel I never saw is where you think George is going to walk out naked in front of Elaine and Kramer and Jerry. Only he does, except they're all three naked too. And so, like, they all walked in on each other naked. And how do they deal with that as a group? It's not that one person saw one other person naked, it's that they all, yeah.
Well, it's very
Um,
simple. We all have to get naked.
yeah.
Light ourselves on fire, fall into the swamps, become a sentient mosh person for some reason.
I feel it's so hard to do a Seinfeld impersonation without it ultimately becoming just like blatantly saying things in an obnoxious way. You know
What's
what I
the
mean?
what's the deal with Seinfeld impressions?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. But yeah,
Well, it appears we fall into a swamp of our own making, and the fisherman is not reeling any caches today. Although I did
yeah,
realize at some point there's a
there's
mini
gonna
game where I have to shoot boats and people on jet skis, so that's fun.
yes, there is a mini game where you get to murder people on the lake to help further your fishing endeavors. Because to be fair, when people are boating and jet skiing around like that, I mean that does like bother the fish.
See,
But yeah,
I always
we like.
I had
I'm
always
sorry.
seen Swamp Thing as like this, I've never seen Swamp Thing. I thought it was just a monster in the swamps. I thought that the Swamp Thing would be the guy just floating in the lake being like, "Oh, these teenagers on their jet skis drinking their Bud Lights
Oh
and
yeah,
listening to their Jimmy
I could.
Buffett. I must
I
punish
could.
them."
See, I saw this. I saw Swamp Thing so young that through pretty much all of my life, I've known Swamp Thing's a good guy. But if you don't know that, he almost sounds like Creature from the Black Lagoon,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I never made that connection. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, look, while I'm still down to discuss for a while, but while I come up with my not closing arguments, but I guess my final comments on Swamp Thing 2. Again, Christian name, The Return of Swamp Thing. Um, you talk to me for a minute about this table. I know you're not the biggest pinballer, which means you're not a very big digital pinballer. I like pinball in real life, but I feel digital pinball is definitely far more convenient, especially if you live in a tighter place. So after playing this table now a couple of times, the table being Fishtails, which is the free table that comes with the game you're playing. What are your impressions of, just briefly? What are your impressions of pinball as a whole, and what are your impressions of the table Fishtails?
I don't think this guy is going to get his kids back.
Ah, okay. So you're progressing in the table.
I don't really know what progress in a pinball table would be. I mean, there are achievements, I'm unlocking them. There's
Yeah,
ramps, I'm sliding on them.
it's basically unlocking modes
Huh,
and clearing modes. That's basically how you essentially beat most pinball tables.
it's true, and wizard powers. Oh, I can't use my wizard powers. I need my Swamp Thing powers. Quick, someone grow a flower. But no,
Yeah,
there is another table
yeah.
actually that we could explore that is free.
Somebody grow an orgasmic flower, right?
Oh God, if only.
Yeah, it's almost like a different take on a scene from The Matrix. Not
the
that I've never actually seen. I don't think I've seen any of the Matrix films from start to finish.
Really interesting. I'm just
I mean,
imagining a nerd standing up in a theater during The Matrix when it came out saying, Swamp Thing did it first!
right.
Yawn!
I should
Unoriginal!
write, I should write an article about all of the things that the Matrix quote unquote stole from Swamp Thing.
You should do it. I I not only believe
That's
that
not
you should
actually
do
all
it,
of the movie.
I think you should be prepared for the blowback when your article is deemed transphobic. No, no, actually, Swamp Thing would be deemed transphobic.
What's transphobic about Swamp Thing?
It's not about it actually being transphobic. It's just they would just
Well,
use
no,
it
I
that
mean,
way.
what would the argument be?
I
Yeah.
have no idea. Let's see. Let me try to think of something.
If anything, I think Swamp Thing argues that anything good should be accepted and celebrated.
Well, let's define good.
Well, see, that's the thing. Like in life, we have to define good and bad for ourselves. I mean, to a degree. There's some things I think most of us agree are good.
That's fair. Well, perhaps this is the end of our fishtail. We've reeled in the big catch. We've learned a lot about ourselves, the swamps, the wetlands, psychedelic flower sex. Is there any closing
Yeah.
arguments you'd like
Yeah.
to have before we close this case and adjourn?
Um, I've been sitting here like thinking about the movie while we've been talking about it and trying to see if there's anything I wanted to add. It's just, the first Swamp Thing, not a bad film. But the second Swamp Thing, the Swamp Thing Two, the Return of Swamp Thing, it's a hell of a time, man. I mean, from the opening, which is Creedence Clearwater Revival's "Born on the Bayou," which is the perfect
wait,
song.
wait, you didn't start with this? The fact that this movie opens up like every Vietnam flick?
It does, and
We just see
I
helicopters flying over
purposely
the Everglades. Ah, some
I
folks are born
purposely
free to wear the flag.
Well, that's Fortunate Son, okay, but you're right, same band. But Born on the Bayou is the perfect song for Swamp Thing. He essentially was, and it just and it's not a cover of the song either. It's the damn song because when Wynorski makes a film, regardless of if it's good or bad, that man makes a goddamned film. Okay, and so you're going to start with a damn good song, and it's just going to rock and roll from there. I feel Swamp Thing 2, Christian name, The Return of Swamp Thing. I feel Swamp Thing 2 is quite possibly the best film Wynorski ever made. And this is not the only film he made that I like, but I feel it's the best film he made. I feel it's one of the best superhero films of all time. And it's just so absurd and abstract and funny and unique and action packed. I can almost guarantee you've never seen anything like it. And love it or hate it, it's I feel like you will at the very least have some type of impression about it by the end of it. I think that's what makes it such a important and seminal work. So Swamp Thing 2, birth name The Return of Swamp Thing. You check it out. I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun.
Well, there you have it, folks. A closing argument for our second Fish Tales. The Return of Swamp Thing, Swamp Thing 2. Check it out. And whatever you do, don't go see She Hulk Attorney at Law in theaters. If you stop giving them money, they will stop making these things and we'll all finally be free.
If it's anything like My Cousin Vinny, then I might have to check it out. I'm not a
I,
huge My Cousin Vinny fan. It's just I feel that atmosphere, that kind of funny courtroom atmosphere with like the right She-Hulk. Yeah, I feel like that might could work the same way Swamp Thing 2, The Return of Swamp Thing works as something uniquely strange in its own right, while also paying homage to its original source material.
oh, see, I thought you meant that, like, by the end of it, she would, like, eat a flower on his suit and She Hulk would turn into a Vinny and they would just walk out into the sunset together.
I'd like to see like a reverse She-Hulk or a reverse like Swamp Thing, where it's two monsters that become human. Yeah, for sure, and become lawyers. Yeah,
No, no,
for
no.
sure. Oh no,
She would become
one's
a
a
Vinny.
lawyer.
Like,
Yeah, no, you're right. Not lawyers, Vinnies. Yeah, cousin Vinnies.
yeah,
We
just
all have
green
one.
screen that.
Yeah, we all have one.
Well, all right. This concludes another fun evening of pinning balls in the marshlands. Tune in next week, same time, same place, for another exciting fishtail.